Hi there, Paul. A long time ago in a faraway land, a young married woman found her honeymoon cut short when her husband's sister came to stay with them. The young woman, Shingai, had heard the wording of her dreams, marrying off her sweetheart in a ceremony that had yet to be seen in their kingdom, and that would have people talking and trying to top for years. But their marriage had merely been a week old when hell was unleashed on her. A family meeting had been called by Shingai's father-in-law. In this family, he said, it is tradition that we look after each other and that no other family member is left behind. As you all know, my daughter, Chiezo, has been widowed for some time now, and since then, she came back into my home and became my responsibility once again. While I cannot complain as she is my own spawn, I am also getting advanced in age, and with that, I task my youngest son Vuma with the responsibility of caring for his sister. Vuma had graciously accepted and told his father he already had an empty heart on his plot of land. I had built it for my future offspring, but since this will take months, my sister Chiezo will live there while I build a new heart, he had said. And that very same afternoon, Chiezo had moved into her new home and within hours had already cast a dark shadow in Shingai's home. Vumai had left the homestead after the meeting and gone for a young hunt with his friends and told the two young women to get acquainted with each other. Chiezo and Shingai had then sat in the kitchen hearth for long uncomfortable moments, where Chiezo openly examined the young beautiful woman before her, while Shingai scrambled in her mind for something to say to ease the tension in the heart. She tried to talk about the weather, but Chiezo seemed disinterested, simply grunting in response. She tried to talk about the prices of food in the market, about the local gossip, about the king and his rapid weight loss, but still, the responses she got remained non-committal, until at last she gave up and sat staring sightlessly outside through the door, while giving in to the intense scrutiny of the woman she would share the homestead with. As the sun began to set, and the hunters and miners could be heard trudging back from their daily toils into the villages, Shingai stood to begin preparing supper, but was told by Chiezo, I have not cooked for my brother in so long, and yet he loves my food, she said. Let me prepare food for him for old time's sake. Shingai did not object. Instead, she welcomed the idea that she was now sharing a space with someone who could help her out with her daily chores. She sat back and watched as Chiezo prepared an intricate dish of sadza and munyeve, trying so hard not to salivate at the tantalizing scents that filled the little kitchen. After Chiezo was done, the two women sat back as the meal simmered over hot coals and waited for Vuma, who did not take long to advise. Quick, Chiezo said, as she slapped spoonfuls of steaming sadza into a plate. Your husband likes his food hot. Carry it to him. And Shingai did as had been instructed, scurrying to the dare where her husband sat and helping him wash his hands before handing him his covered plate. But Fuma's immediate reaction as he opened the plate was a scrunch of his nose and a pushing of the plate away. Munyeve, he said, forcing Shingai to accept back the plate. I do not eat this relish. He then sighed as Shingai's face clouded with confusion. Surely, Chiezo would have known this about her brother, but Vuma was continuing. You should have asked my sister if I eat this before deciding to change the menu I have specifically told you I liked. Shingai opened her mouth to tell him that it had been in fact Chiezo who had cooked and not her, but a shadow had fallen over her, and instead a voice, Chiezo, spoke. Yes, she could have asked me, brother, the voice said. Instead, all she did was ignore me the whole afternoon, and I was beginning to feel a tad unwelcome. Shingai was stunned, too stunned to move. Why was this woman lying, huh? She turned to Vuma to give her side of the story, but there was a slight unspoken censure in her husband's eyes. So she stopped herself, mumbled her apologies, and left the dairy with the plate to go and cook a new meal for her husband. As she worked quickly in the kitchen, she could hear the siblings talking and laughing out loud, but a lump of bitterness sat lodged in her throat. She knew she would never let her sister-in-law close to a fire again. She also knew she had an opponent in her homestead and had to work with her eyes open. She sighed as she cooked, realizing that trouble had followed her once again. Just now, when she was beginning to relax after escaping the poverty and lack of her childhood home, a new person had been foisted upon her. She had no problem with living with her sister-in-law. On the contrary, she loved people, having grown up in a very large family, raised by her father's younger brother and his wife after her own parents had passed, and growing up and sharing the little they had with her cousins, and joyously so. So she had expected that living with her sister-in-law would be harmonious. She sat back now and watched her husband interact with his sister, and her heart swelled at the sight of the man she loved so, and who had defied odds to be with her. She remembered how they had met as she collected clay by the river for her pottery, and he had kindly helped her carry back the clay home. Their romance had been sweet and easy, and she knew she wanted to be with him forever. And when he had proposed to marry her, she had quickly accepted. She had expected opposition from his family, him coming from one of the kingdom's most elite families, and she, just another poor girl, but his parents had been charmed by her beauty and her reserved nature, and thus they welcomed her in the family with open arms. And she had thought that with a kind and sweet man who loved her, and parents-in-law who doted on her, she would feel safe in her marriage. But that had been before she met Shiezo, and now she knew that this was where her problems would come from. That first night after Chiezo's arrival, Shingai had expected to have a conversation with her husband, but he was his usual, jovial, jocular self that she felt it would be unfair to bring up the conversation, and she surrendered her heart and her body to him. She was awoken, however, way before the first cock crowed the next morning, to scraps in her yard. For a long moment, she lay still in her bed, wondering if there was some type of witchcraft going on since it was the ungodly hour. But when the scrap would not stop, she extracted herself from her husband's arms, grabbed her altar cot, and tiptoed to her window. And behold, it was a sight to see as Chiezo was sweeping the ground in the barely there gleam of the sinking moon. For a long moment, Shingai watched, wondering if perhaps she were watching a demented woman whose senses had deserted her. She debated with herself on whether she should go and ask what was wrong, but then remembered how the evening's events had been twisted against her. She then half laughed, half sighed, then took off her outer coat and returned to the warmth of her husband's chest. It seemed she had not slept for much longer when both her and Vuma were roused by a banging on their door. They both sat up, rubbing their eyes, and looked at each other before the banging resumed again, and a voice, Chiezo, said, Murora, Murora Shingai, what time do you wake up here? Or do you intend to wake up after the sun has risen to midday? Shingai quickly glanced at the window to see if day had broken, but it was still dark outside. She sighed and looked over at her husband, who was smiling and beckoning her back to bed. But the banging sounded again, and shaking her head, Shingai stood and then donned her day dress before leaving her hut. Shiezo erupted as soon as Shingai stepped out. What kind of woman are you that sleeps this late? The sister-in-law said. Where in the world were you raised where women wake up at the same time as the sun rises? Did no one teach you womanhood or wifehood? Huh? Just because you had no mother growing up is no excuse for laziness, for tardiness. What kind of mother will you be if you are going to be waking up this late? Come, clean up the grates from last night's ash so that you start preparing your husband's bath waters and you prepare his meals before you leave for the fields. Ah, my brother's caught a lazy one here. Just saw a light-skinned face and thought he had won. She clapped her hands in surrender before moving with her broom to go and sweep another corner of the compound. Shingai was left standing there, gaping, as the sting and pinch of the words that had been said landed comfortably in her brain. She could have ignored everything else her sister-in-law had said, had Shiezo not mentioned her mother. And as Shingai regurgitated the words again, she felt tears pool in her eyes as she remembered the warmth of the woman who had passed when she was young. Even as she stood now, she knew it would be difficult to conjure an image of her mother in her mind, but the warmth and comfort the woman had exuded she could remember, as she had never experienced that after her mother's passing. And Shiyozo's words had been a cruel trigger. Oh, how she missed her mother this early morning, standing under the eaves of her heart before dawn broke and having her decency questioned. She sighed for the umpteenth time, then shrugged before going to start her daily chores as prescribed. The next morning, she was awoken by the banging again, but by the third morning, her internal clock had acclimatized to the new system, and she was up even before Chiezo was. But after that third morning, Chiezo did not rise up so early again, instead sleeping as late as daybreak and waking up to use the bath water put on the fire by Shingai and eating the porridge Shingai had made. It is tiring waking up so early, she complained to her husband one afternoon, because once I am awake, there is something that needs to be cooked, washed, cleaned, and I need to go to the field with the others, and then later to the river to collect clay for my pottery, and then I will get home and start working on my pots and pans and plates before I have to cook for you, clean up afterwards, and wake up very early in the morning again. I know, my love, Vuma agreed, and I appreciate that the schedule may be hard for you. What I don't understand is why you have to wake up so early. You are not obligated to do that and scare the witches away. It pains me waking up every morning to find that my beloved has already left my side. Go back to your early days routine. But your sister, I will talk to her, Vuma interjected. Don't worry about that. But Shingai should have worried, because the next morning, when she awoke to the breaking of the day, it was to find Shiezo sitting on the step of her hut, chewing on a stick and looking at her with eyes that had darkened ominously. A new bout of fresh fights had been activated. Shiezo spoke to her as she grabbed a broom. I never said wake up too early, she said. All I said was that a wife had to arise before day broke. I don't even understand why you had to go to your husband to report. Every little thing we shall talk about, are you going to report? Or you just want to drive a wedge between my brother and I? Or perhaps you want me to go back to my father's home and have me say that you chased me away? I suppose that will make you feel better? Shingai did not know how to respond, but quickly carried out her household chores before selecting her hose and her snacks and drinks to go to the field. Chiyezo followed in her footsteps, also carrying her implements, but once they got there and Shingai began working, Chiyezo found a spot underneath a tree where she rested her back on the trunk and proceeded to alternately pick the dirt off her nails or doze off, while Shingai rounded row after row of crops as she swiftly weeded her field. It became their routine, waking up at daybreak, Shingai doing all the household chores while Chiyezo would hold a broom and walk rounds around the homestead while doing nothing. When Shingai had finished with the chores and Vuma would leave to tend to his father's mines, the two women would then leave for the fields, Chiyezo trudging lazily behind and then going to sit in a spot underneath the tree. Within weeks, though, she had made friends in the fields around, and when she was not dozing underneath the tree, she was going round in the fields talking and gossiping. As the sun would grow hotter, Shingai would straighten, then go back home to cook the morning meal and leave some for Chiyezo on the hot coals. And then she would go to the murkier parts of the river and harvest some clay which she would bring home in a small bag while carrying a pail of water atop her head. Back home again, she would begin to potter, making intricate pots, cups, and plates that she planned to sell later. Then, sometime in the day, Chiezo would return and eat her food, barely concealing her disgust at what she would call tasteless food, and then leaving her unwashed plates by the fireside before retreating into her hut for an afternoon nap. She would only wake up after Vuma had returned from the mines and Shingai had dished up the supper, and only then, sitting with her brother, would the glumness lift off her face and be quickly replaced by a jovial nature that would startle Shingai, who would find the sister-in-law super different from the girls she would spend her days with. And as she prepared supper, Chiezo would watch Shingai, resentment brewing like a storm in her heart. This was the girl whose beauty everyone discussed in the market, in the streets, at community events, and any place else people congregated. Everyone talked about the texture of her skin, the build of her body, and the carriage she possessed as she walked and talked. He would swear she's royalty, people said, once she had been introduced as Fuma's wife to be. She does not look like she comes from the poor villages at all. But despite those compliments, Chiezo could not find anything endearing about the young woman. To her, Shingai was as plain as a leaf, and looked just like any other girl who had dug her clothes into the family's wealth. She despised that before Shingai arrived, it was her Chiezo everyone had talked about. It was her beauty that had been incomparable. It was her who had been the prize for any young man within the village. And even after she had been widowed so soon after her marriage, men had continued to line up at her father's door to ask for her hand in marriage. But now this girl had come and upstaged her, and even the men who had been courting her were beginning to scout for women in the poor villages, women who were not just beautiful, but were also hard-working. Chiezo knew that she had to act and do something before this girl obliterated her and she became a forgotten. Days turned into weeks, then into moons, and the crops grew, and there was no need to spend as much time in the fields anymore, and Shingai spent a majority of her time pottering about. She had, with the help of Fuma, found a stall in the market where she would sell the stock of pottery she had created in the months she had been married. A part of her was excited. She had always loved independence, seeing as she had had to help in fending for herself and her family since she was barely a babe, and now she would make her own money. She was also excited too that she would not spend as much time in the same proximity as Chiezo, and she knew time spent away from her sister-in-law was like a boulder having been lifted from her shoulders. Yet a part of her was anxious. This would be her first foray into the big bad world, and she was not sure how she would cope on her own without having to depend on her elders or her husband to make decisions for her. She was right to have been anxious, for when she arrived at her new store, a silence fell amongst not just the fellow store owners, but amongst the market goers too. Shingai, though she tried to hide the fact that she could feel everyone watching her, knew that it was uncanny to have generated so much interest amongst people she had barely ever interacted with. She had stayed in the other area of the kingdom, and this was Fuma's home. So why had people stopped whatever they had been doing to watch her? It did not take her long to get the gist of the buzz, for as soon as she had set up her stall, a middle-aged woman had stopped to admire the wares she had put on display. "This is beautiful," the woman said, as she raised a small puko to be used to make fermented beer. "You made all this by yourself?" "Yes, Amai," Shingai responded, proud too as she watched the greens and reds she had painted on the pot reflected in the early morning sun. "How much is it?" the older woman asked, and once Shingai had named the price, the older woman had exclaimed, and the two women haggled over the price for a bit until at last the purchaser agreed on the price and handed Shingai some gold coins. Shingai's heart swelled at the success of her first purchase, but quickly fell at the woman's next words. "Thank you, Fuma's wife." You make beautiful pottery. We cannot wait for the beautiful babies you will make for your husband. Shingai grunted in response, but a sting had pierced her heart. She had been married for 5 months now, and yet her stomach had not stirred. Every moon, she had waited patiently, hoping for the moment she would skip a moon, but her womb would ache sorely instead, followed by torrents of blood, and she knew the baby train would have missed her again. She had wondered when people would start questioning her about the baby, and here, now, the strange woman had come to ask her about babies. And so too did the other customers. You married the only son in the Fuma family, the stranger said. You should have a baby to carry on the legacy soon, they would advise her. By mid-morning, she was tired and she decided to take a break from all the unsolicited advice and stepped into the bushes behind the market. But no sooner had she inhaled air did she find herself wishing it out quickly afterwards, for two gossiping voices filtered directly to her, and one of those was clear and distinct, Chiezo's voice. All she does is eat and eat and eat and grow bigger, but she does not even try to conceive for my brother. When she came into this house, she was as skinny as my arm. Now she's bigger than me. You know, I found a bag of herbs in your heart the other day. I then went to my nganga and I asked what the herbs were and what they are used for, and he said they were used by women to prevent pregnancy. The other woman responded. A brand new wife with no history of children, why would she be preventing pregnancy for? Because she doesn't love my brother, that's why, Shiezo said. Did you know that she comes from the lowest of the low? Yes, the poor villagers, the other voice said. But shouldn't she be having a baby to cement her relationship with the Fuma family? She must be some kind of special case. No, she just wanted someone to help set up her business, Shiezo responded. She did not care at all about building a legacy for my brother. All she wanted was to help herself. See, now that she has a business, she will not hesitate to give my brother a gupuro to sever the marriage because what she came for has been made possible. You know what? I was opposed to my brother marrying her, but no one would listen to me. Everyone, even my parents, thought I was jealous of her, a girl from the poor villages. Imagine, but look now what she's doing to the family, denying it its only heir. He, she laughed. The other voice laughed too, and Shingai could hear the footsteps as they started to move away. Your brother made a mistake with that one. How can someone from a distinguished family as this choose a girl we do not know? You could have chosen me, and you would not have problems like this. You know what? Chiezo's voice was saying in the distance. Maybe we can show him that there is you, and there is an alternative to this blood-sucking wife of his. Maybe... And Shingai could not hear what else was said as the women walked further away. Alone, in the bushes, she clasped her stomach now and felt its flatness against her palms, and she felt pangs of pain shoot through it. Why would someone decide to lie so blatantly about her like that? She had no herbs at all in her heart. So what was Chiezo talking about? And who else had she been telling this? Was Chiezo the reason everyone was asking why she had not conceived yet? But what was bothering Shingai even more was what she would do about the information. Should she tell her husband? Last time she had talked to Vumai about the early mornings, Shigezo had lied and said that Shingai had misheard her. So no, she would talk to Chiezo and they would solve the matter between themselves without any interference from Vuma. But the conversation with Chiezo later that evening went awry well before Shingai had finished the first sentence of confrontation. Did you see me say that, or you are just making assumptions? Chiezo said. You say you had a voice in the bushes, and because you do not like me already, your immediate thought was that it was me speaking, huh? Why did you not come and tell me whatever you want to say now directly in my face when you say you had my voice? I shall not stand for your nonsense allegations. Take them elsewhere besides here. Always accusing me of things I did not say. This little witch, she finished as she walked away. And later that night, after Vuma had returned from work, Shiezo was the one to dish out the details of the altercation to him. Tell your wife to keep my name out of your mouth, the sister-in-law said. Every time something goes on in your life, she is quick to point her fingers at me. Right now, she is accusing me of starting gossip regarding your inability to conceive, yet she has no evidence that it was me. I feel targeted by her, and I'm beginning to feel uncomfortable around her. Maybe your wife doesn't want me here, Budi, and if so, can she say so that I can go back to my father's home? Vuma looked at his wife, then smiled before turning back to his sister. I believe there was some miscommunication between the two of you. Let it rest, Shiezo. And even as Shiezo let it rest, Shingai knew again she had been defeated. She had to get pregnant to prove her sister-in-law wrong, to prove the entire community that had lapped up Shiezo's lies wrong. But nothing happened in the next moon, as again her womb had rejected her husband's seed. And now it was not just Shiezo who was speaking, but the hum-hums of infertility were being discussed in the Fuma family. At first, these were subtle, and the women and aunts would jokingly comment on your flat stomach. But as the days flew by, she could see the scrutiny with which they looked at her stomach with, and could hear the snide remarks they made amongst themselves as they walked away. The emptiness of your womb was beginning to trouble her, even though Vuma, who had seen her unspoken worries, told her over and over again, "Don't worry, it will happen soon." Determined for it to happen even sooner and to hold her own child, yet scared to talk to her husband about it, Shingai decided to visit Asiya alone. "I miss my family," she told Vuma one night after marital consummation. "I have only ever seen them once since we married. If you allow me, Baba, may I please go and visit them tomorrow?" Vuma nodded and said, "But the distance is too far, my love. Do you think you can make it back in one day?" "Yes," Shingai responded. "Remember we used to traverse the coast when we were courting." Vuma smiled, then said, "Okay, that is fine. But please, do ask some of the family guards to accompany you so you are not alone." But when Shingai left the following morning, she quietly evaded the guards, and instead of taking the route that would take her home, she went into the forest where a great healer lived in a secluded cave and whose prowess in solving all issues physical and spiritual were well lauded. The cave was dark and moist despite the sweltering heat outside. Its entrance was lit by lamps that flickered feebly and lit a path for Shingai. There was trepidation in her heart as she walked closer, yet she knew there was no turning back. As she walked further into the cave, she saw skulls lined against the walls, and she did not dare look at them for long, for she was not sure whether they were human or animal, and also did not dare to confirm. Finally, she reached a lighter corner of the cave, where an old woman sat, looking down into a bowl that seemed to contain water, and before Shingai could even speak to announce her presence, the woman spoke, as though to someone or something in the bowl. "She has arrived, the bearer of nations, the one who the ancestors are cleansing to carry the next generations of not just the family she married into, but the future of royalty. Her steps have carried her here, great ones, but you have to let me know if it is time so we cleanse her and prepare her for the greatness that is to come." Shingai stood, stunned, wondering what was happening. There was a long silence in the cave as the old woman seemed to be listening intently to a voice only she could hear. Then after a long while of silence, Shingai figured that the old woman had not noticed her presence, so she cleared her throat and spoke. "Good day, great seer. My name is Shingai of the Hara clan and married into the Fuma family. I came here to see you because I have a matter of great importance. I need your help." The old woman raised her head towards Shingai, and Shingai almost recoiled, for there, in the sockets of her eyes, were white grayish balls with neither iris nor pupil, giving the old woman an otherworldly look. Shingai's hairs rose as she shivered, and as the cave threatened to close in on her and swallow her. But what made her produce a whimper-like sound was not even the eerie sight before her, but the fact that the sightless grandmother's eyes seemed to be looked directly into her eyes, discerning her mind. Shingai tried to turn, to run away, but it seemed as though the eyes had glued her to the spot, for she could not move even a finger. Then the woman nodded before speaking again, her unseeing eyes gazing into Shingai's. My child, the great gone ones have told me to tell you this message, that you have been chosen. Your womb has been chosen to carry the most powerful man of all the kingdoms around us. His role shall be to unify the splinters of the Zero Kingdom that broke into five a century ago as the five sons of the reigning king all wanted to be kings. But you, descendant of the outcasted, ostracized true king, shall unify the kingdoms again through your womb. Then the old woman fell silent again. Shingai was even more confused. What was this woman saying? Five kingdoms, descendant of ostracized true king, unification through the womb? Surely this woman must have mistaken her for someone else, and her not being able to see was making things worse. She, Shingai, had grown up poor. Surely there was no way she had royal blood. No, this woman was wrong. She then decided to speak to clear the confusion, and in a small voice she said, You must be mistaken, great seer, for I know nothing of what you speak of. I just came here for herbs to help me in conceiving. The seer nodded, then slid her hand into the folds of her skirt and retrieved a small bottle which she handed to Shingai. Then she said, Bath with the potion once every day until it finishes. All you need is a drop in your bath water. Your stomach will stir when the moon waxes a third time from now. Lift the worry off your face and go on back home. For the longest moment, Shingai remained standing, unsure if she had heard right. But she could see the seer's eyes still on his, so she mumbled, Thank you, and began a slow trek outside. But unbeknownst to Shingai, someone had not only followed her from her home, but into the cave, and had heard everything the seer had said. And yet, instead of disbelief like Shingai, Shiyezo had believed everything the seer had said. She had seen Shingai slip out of the homestead in the morning, and curiosity has gripped her as Shingai's steps were furtive and quick, as though she were a thief. Instantly, her hackles had risen, and she had decided to follow her sister-in-law, because this was her chance to get something concrete, and which she could use against Shingai. But what she had not been prepared of was what she had learned from what the seer had said. She had of course known of the story of the breaking up of the Zero Kingdom through the various folk tales of her kingdom. She knew of the true king who had been born of a Persian mother and who had been denied his kingship as the five royal sons fought for kingship. She had heard that the true king had then been banished and lived in poverty for the rest of his life. But it had all been folklore. He did not. And yet the seer had said Shingai was the unifier of the kingdoms, as she was of royal blood. In her mind, Shiyezo knew this was true. Something about the blind old woman who had somehow seen her Shiyezo lurking in the corners and looked her straight in the eye with her dead eyes, and yet not given Shiyezo's presence away, had rung with sincerity. But what was worse was that she knew too of the prophecy, of the oracle that had been spoken by the seer. For when she had been young, a visiting seer had said to her family who had gathered in the homestead's yard to hear the prophecy, There is a line of royalty in this family. A female shall link you all to royalty, and her offspring shall become king. Chiyezo had then taken it upon herself to marry into the royal family, and she had married a distant cousin of the incumbent king, hoping that the tiny glint of royalty in her husband's blood would be enough to create a future king. But her husband had passed 3 weeks after their union, and she had not fallen pregnant by then. So the king will be born by Shingai, was her thought as she hurried home. Shingai, the stranger, and not her, had been chosen to carry the next generation of kings. No, she thought to herself, not under my watch, not if I can help it. I have to do something, break her marriage so that no king would be conceived, or I shall steal that bottle from the seer and throw it away. She knew that was the best option. She, Chiezo, had been the one to marry into royalty. She was the one who had been chosen to carry the next king. Not this impostor who had come into your brother's home with nothing. No, this Shingai had come to make her a shadow in your own family. But now it had to end. She, Chiezo, would rise to power again. She would marry again. And she would become the talk of the town again. Not Shingai. Back at home, Shingai quickly warmed her bath water and dropped some of the potion from the vial into it before sinking into the tub and allowing her body to relax. But even as her body heaved off the tiredness in it, her mind raced. What had the seer meant? Royalty? No, her parents had been as poor as dead before they had accepted her bride price. Her grandparents and their great-grandmother had also worn rags. So how was she, Shingai, tied to royalty? She pondered over this question for a long while until the water turned lukewarm around her and she was forced to rise. As she dried herself, she let out a laugh, then said to herself, don't take that old seer seriously. She is most likely a loony from spending time alone all those years. Besides, how did she know it was you when she could not see? But her eye caught the glint of the vial bottle and she nodded. It would not hurt to try the potion anyway. I just need to keep it out of Chiezo's sight. Back in her heart, she moved her bed, dug a small hole underneath it, and buried the potion in the hole before writing the bed. Then she cupped her stomach and said, please work with me here. Please cooperate. For a week after the visit to the seer, Chiezo would sneak into Shingai and Buma's heart as soon as the two had left for work. Alone there, she searched for the potion in every crevice and in every recess, and she found nothing. After several futile attempts, she knew she now had to activate her next step, and she too made a visit in the forest one night to the wizard whose powers were feared in all the kingdoms around, and who charged a king's treasure to all who sought his services. Mix this in your meals as soon as you learn that she carries. 3 drops only for 3 meals on the same day in the first 3 months of carrying, and the baby will sleep out like an eel. Chiezo reached out her hand to accept the potion, but the wizard held on to it and said, this has magical powers. You have to be sure you administer it as I tell you. 4 drops will not work, neither will 2 drops. And if anyone else besides the intended consumes the food, then they would die immediately. But most importantly, if you are caught trying to poison anyone, then you shall sing everything and all you have done will be exposed for the world to see. So 3 drops as early into the carriage as possible and do not get caught. The days fled, and one evening, as the moon waxed, Shingai realized that she had not steered that moon. She held her breath in for a week, trying to still the giddy excitement in her heart, and when the week passed, and still there was no stirring, she told her husband the happy news. Vuma then went to tell his parents. Then his parents told the whole world, together with the cats and the ducks and the mosquitoes all around them, and a ceremony was to be held to hail the arrival of a boy child who would continue with the legacy of the Fuma family. Chinyenzo feigned joy when she heard, rushing to hug her sister-in-law, who was of course shocked by the effusion of joy from the usually dour Chiyezo. But even in that embrace, her mind was working quickly. How would she convince Shingai to eat a meal Chiezo had created? The animosity between the two of them was so tangible, they only exchanged morning greetings and nothing else. Of course, Shingai would quickly, and rightfully so, suspect any food she would receive from Chiezo, and she would not touch it. It would have to be done on the day of the ceremony to hail the arrival of the child. Chiezo would make sure to bring Shingai all meals and would be least suspected then. The Fuma family went all out in planning for the legacy ceremony that Shingai felt as though they were preparing for a wedding. Beasts were slaughtered, beer was brewed days in advance, and the best cooks were hired, each to cook their best dish. A dressmaker was summoned to create a golden dress for the mother-to-be, and Shingai was pampered as much as possible in the days leading to the ceremony that she felt like royalty. She had, of course, visited their family in the days towards the ceremony and asked their uncle if they had royal blood, to which the older man had laughed and laughed and laughed until he had looked her in the eye and said, "You marry a rich man, my daughter, and now you fancy yourself royalty? No, Shingai Manangu, don't be entertaining fancies in your head and don't try to run away from the reality of the family you came from. I, your father's brother, like my other family members, am a poor farmer, and that's just it, okay?" Shingai had nodded, then promptly forgotten about the old seer. Yes, she might have bathed with the potion until it had finished, but who could say that it was that which had prompted her pregnancy? She could still have become pregnant without the help of the potion. And now, as she sat in her golden dress in her chair of honor at the event and watched the ancestral appeasement rites being undertaken before her, she smiled at her husband who sat beside her and held their stomach under the covers of the table. They had done it. Once the rites were over, the food savers came with steaming hot plates of food, weaving in and out of the crowd and ensuring that no stomach went unfed. Shingai accepted a plate from Chiezo, who smiled curtly at her. But as she set the plate before her, a feeling of queasiness gripped her, and she willed her throat not to let up last night's meal that sat at the throat's base. She had been feeling queasy every morning from the pregnancy, but she did not want to embarrass herself in front of everyone, let alone the royal family who had also come to celebrate with the Fuma family. Fuma, who had already started on his plate, stopped mid-chew and asked his wife, "Are you okay?" She nodded. "I will eat soon. I just want my stomach to settle down." He nodded. "Okay," then looked over at her plate. "That meat portion is quite small. A woman carrying a man has to eat a lot because she's eating for two." He reached into his plate and took out the turkey drumstick, which was usually reserved for men, and put it in a plate before he reached for the winglet in a plate that was reserved for women. He then opened his mouth as he brought the meat closer for a bite, but the meat had not reached his lips before a hand had slapped his wrist so roughly, leading to the meat clattering across the table. He had not even raised his head to see who it was when he heard his sister Chiezo shout at him, "Do you have a death wish? Why do you eat from another's plate?" Whether or not Chiezo had realized the impact of her words did not matter, as immediately the crowd responded. Everyone looked at the next morsel that they had been about to eat, then as though in slow motion, replaced it in their plates. A silent hum fell across the crowd, and everyone was staring at Chiezo, who now stood rooted to the ground in fear. Then your father spoke in a low, soft voice that did nothing to hide its danger. "What did you say, Chiezo?" he said. Chiezo did not respond, but her eyes had bulged large in fear. Her father spoke again, pointing to the turkey wing that still lay across the table. "Pick that meat and eat it now, Chiezo." She did no such thing, instead turning on her heel and making as if to run away. But two belly guards stood before her, forming an impenetrable wall that she simply bounced against before she slumped to the ground. Her father spoke again now and said, Chiyezo, speak now of what you did, or else I will hand you over to the crowd, and they will deal with you. The crowd chanted, Yes, yes, give her to us. We will make her talk. Father, she said, looking at your father with a plea in your eyes, please let all the strangers go. Then when they are gone, I will tell you everything. But your father stood and said calmly, Well, it was you who tried to shenanigan in front of all these people. If I ask them to leave now, then they will fabricate this story and make things worse for you. I am sorry, my daughter, but you shall testify in front of all these witnesses. But when Shiezo did not speak, her father sneered and shouted, Now, or I will banish you into the wilderness and disown you forever. Speak. Trembling and in a low voice, Chiezo spoke and said, It is not my fault. The Nganga in the forest gave me the potions and said that she was the one who was bewitching the family and causing me not to find a husband. He said just a drop of the potion would cure her of the witchcraft. She would not have died if she had eaten the potioned food. The crowd roared and began speaking loudly amongst themselves, calling her a liar, a witch, a woman hater. Give her to us, they called out. But the head former man spoke again and said, Chiyezo Manangu, since when has anyone in this family consulted a wizard? Since when have you been given the power to administer a potion on another family member without their knowledge and consent? Huh? What if she had been harmed? What if she had passed, and then your spirit would have become a lingering spirit in our homes, demanding our blood? Huh? What selfishness is this, Chiezo, that you have done? The man's shoulders slumped, defeated. Someone in the crowd then shouted, Disown her! Another shouted, Banish her! Another shouted, Disinherit her! The old man looked at his daughter, and everyone around him could see the remnant of his love in his eyes. They saw too the agony that sat there, and knew that he would have trouble disowning the daughter he so loved. They saw too that he neither had the strength nor the willpower to do so, and they felt his utter sadness in their own souls. The old man slumped back into his seat, tired and defeated. But it was the king who stood and spoke, his voice weary and far away too. My people, he said to the startled crowd, who looked up at him wondering why he was speaking. It was not a royal event after all. This young woman, like me, committed a major crime against the crown, and she, like me too, deserves to be punished. He went quiet as the crowd that was now looking at him with unabated curiosity. Before I was crowned to become king many moons ago, he continued, I was warned by the royal diviner from sitting on the throne, as it was not my place to sit. There was a rightful royal then, a queen, but I did not listen, for I had waited for so long, 39 reigns in fact, to become king. So I went ahead and accepted kingship at my coronation. It was okay, the throne, at first, but day by day, the seat became more and more heavier, and the crown became more and more spikier. Then 3 years ago, the dreams began. He took a deep breath and leaned wearily onto his cane. Each night, every night, an old man from olden days would appear in my dreams, telling me to let go of the throne. Whenever I closed my eyes, he would appear, and with each time, his voice was louder. Pass the throne to the rightful heir, the Zero Queen. At first I didn't listen, but as the days went by, I could not sleep or eat, and I started to lose weight, as you can all see from my gauntness. I went back to the royal diviner, and he was gracious enough to show me the rightful Queen of Zero. He then went on to describe everything that had happened as he had learned from the diviner, of the splitting of the kingdom, of the banishment of the illegitimate son who was also the true king, and his exile in poverty. and of his forefathers' rise to power, and how he had inadvertently become king because of the succession of kings before him. When the illegitimate son was banished, he continued, he went to live in the poor communities where he became a fisherman. He seared the son, then passed. The son seared a son, then the next son seared a daughter, and then the daughter gave birth to Queen Shingai here, our queen. Then, with all the sadness in his body, he turned and walked over to Shingai's seat. Then, to the utter astonishment of the crowd and everyone gathered, he knelt before Shingai, then took off his crown and handed it to her. He then handed her the golden cane in his hand and said, "My queen, my actions in sitting on a throne that is not mine is tantamount to treason. I, like your sister-in-law, have intended to cause and caused your reign harm. As such, it is only you who can pass a verdict on our lives, my queen." He bowed his head so low his forehead almost touched the ground. Shingai had never been more confused in her life. She looked up at the crowd, and everyone was looking up at her in reverence and awe. She could read some of their expressions that a young poor woman had not only married a wealthy man, but then discovered that she was queen, all in the same year. What fortune was that? She seemed to hear their expressions say, but as the silence stretched for longer, she knew that they were expecting her to say something. So she stood up, the weight of the crown heavy in her hands, and gathered all the courage and energy that she had mustered in working with people in the market. Then she cleared her throat and spoke. "People of Zero," she said, "I am as shocked as you are too. A part of me is trembling as it stands before you, because I know of nothing in the royal kingdom. Yet a part of me feels the truth in all this. I know too that I cannot refuse this crown that has been handed to me, heavy as it is, because it is a crown from the ancestors, and I fear that should I refuse the throne, a heavy punishment will befall the kingdom, as is the law of kingship and queenship, that a baton passed to you shall be served with honor." So, people of Zero, even though I know how unusual this is for all of us, I do accept this crown, and as I go, pledge to learn the responsibilities that come with it. There was a small smattering of applause from the crowd, but then it grew louder and louder until it was almost deafening. Once everyone had settled down, Shingai then spoke, this time addressing the bowed king. "My sir, I know nothing of leading a kingdom. I know nothing of running a kingdom, but I am open to learning. I believe that you, as someone who was born in royalty and who has served this nation as king, can help me learn. I do hereby pardon you of all the crimes you say you have committed, and ask for your guidance and your loyalty as I undertake this journey. Please, sir." The fallen king, with head still bowed down, said, "Of course, my queen, I shall offer you all the assistance that you shall need for as long as I live." And this declaration was met with another round of applause. Then Shingai turned to Chiezo, who also knelt, head bowed, and said, "Is there anything you want to say?" Chiezo heard the authority in Shingai's voice and knew that this was a different person, so she spoke. "I am sorry, my queen, for everything I have subjected you to. I ask that you find it in your heart to forgive me, and I do pledge that from now on I shall respect not just you as my brother's wife, but also you as my queen. Please give me another chance, my queen." Shingai was silent for a while, then took a deep breath before saying, "I cannot sanction a stiff penalty for anyone as one of my first decisions in royalty. As such, I will forgive you, and in the hope that we will work together as family and as sisters, I do hope that what happened today and in the past shall not happen again. Is that all right?" Still kneeling, Chiezo nodded, then outstretched her hand to Shingai, and when Shingai reached for it, they held hands for a brief while before Chiezo said, "Thank you for forgiving me." And Shingai nodded and wondered as she thought of the long road before her as queen, as mother, as wife, and as a sister. The end. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you like the story, please do leave a thumbs up. Please also click the subscribe button. And if you want to interact with me, the comment section below is open for you. See you in the next one. Love you long time. Bye.